My name is Shannon and I'm joined today by Dr. George Dunn. Without further ado, Dr. George Dunn, how you doing?
I'm doing really well, Shannon. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right.
Good, good.
Yeah, it's raining here, so we got a little bit of a breeze.
Yeah. So where are you located?
I'm in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
How's your air quality there?
It's all right for now.
Oh,
You know,
that's good.
yeah. Once once it gets into the you know I guess July, August, September, we'll
Hmm.
start to get those what do we call them? Forest fires.
Uh-huh.
Like they get
Okay.
small. But yeah. How about you? What about you?
Um, we're doing okay here. The weather's good. The air quality is not too bad. Um, yeah, I think we're getting some of the some of the smoke from the forest fires up north, but it's not too bad here in Indianapolis.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I heard about that. They're coming from Canada, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just before we really get into the meat of things, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your work, and your background?
Sure, sure. Well, I am currently community associate faculty at IUI or Indianapolis University in Indiana University in Indianapolis. Um, and I also have affiliation with a university in China. I've been a special research fellow with um, an institute that's associated with Zhejiang University. And I have about 8 years teaching experience in China. So, in addition to having an interest in Western philosophy and religion, I'm also interested in Chinese philosophy and religion. And I've um, edited a number of books. Six of the books I've done have been dealt with philosophy and popular culture. So that's been kind of a specialty of mine. But I've also written on political philosophy and written about Christianity in China. I'm currently um, editing a book on Rene Girard and the Western philosophical tradition, along with Andreas Wilmes, and that'll be published by Michigan State University Press. And I get a couple other irons in the fire. There's um, a book on Leo Strauss's reception in China, and a collection of essays by Lawrence Lampert that I'm editing. So I'm keeping busy.
Right. Right. Well, speaking of Girard, Rene Girard, and Leo Strauss, I was hoping we could actually get into that today because you wrote an essay
Right, right,
on their work, and that's actually that essay is in a book. Is that
right.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Would you
So
mind?
there's a book. Let me hold it up for you. Can you see it? See that lovely cover?
Yeah.
So
Wow. Got the
this is my co-editor, Mongo Telly, found this. It's a detail from a vase at the Museum of Toledo.
okay.
But anyway, the title of the book is A New Politics for Philosophy, Perspectives on Plato, Nietzsche, and Strauss. And it's a collection of essays that we put together as a feshrift. Now, feshrift is a kind of a book that collects essays to honor somebody, usually a distinguished scholar who is nearing the end of his career. So these are essays in honor of Lawrence Lampert, who was one of my teachers, also Mongo, my co-editor. He was also a student of Lawrence. Um, Lawrence Lampert is, I think, in many ways, is probably one of the most important scholars around today, even though a lot of people aren't aware of his work. Um, according to Michael Gillespie, he is Nietzsche's or North America's greatest Nietzsche scholar.
Okay.
And he's written several books that I think just completely revolutionize our understanding of Nietzsche, but also other books that have revolutionized our understanding of Plato and Leo Strauss, or at least will revolutionize our understanding of these thinkers to the extent that we take his insights to heart. So anyway, so this book collects essays on these three thinkers, Plato, Nietzsche, and Strauss. These are the three thinkers to whom Lampert has devoted most of his long lifetime of scholarship. Incidentally, Lawrence Lampert turns 82 years old tomorrow.
Wow.
And he's still working. He's still writing. He has there's a new book that will be coming out next year, which will be some essays that he delivered a few years ago when he was visiting Beijing. But anyway, so this book, New Politics for Philosophy, it collects essays from a pretty wide-ranging international group of people who have been influenced by Lampert's scholarship, including a couple Chinese contributors, Heinrich Meyer, who's a very important Strauss scholar in Germany, Graham Parks, Peter Minowitz, and a number of Lawrence's students. And so the essay that I wrote for this volume, which you've read, I guess, is titled The Collapsing Ladder of Degree. And it's my attempt to bring René Girard and Leo Strauss into conversation, specifically about the origins of the modern world. And this is really kind of central to my own research project right now, which is understanding the role of Christianity and the role of philosophy and the relationship between the two in shaping the modern world. And that's the subject of my chapter.
Okay. Well, I want to say happy birthday to Lampert, and maybe we'll dedicate this video to his birthday. So, yeah. But okay, within the essay, you sort of explain, where we've come from, and where we've gotten to with this. You talked about Nietzsche, right?
Yeah.
And he talks about I guess from pre, what I want to say, postmodern or 18th or 19th century, we started having this concern for equality and rights and sympathy for all that suffers.
Right.
Would you mind starting out with that? Because
Sure. Well, yeah. So although this essay deals with Girard and Strauss, I start with Nietzsche. And one of the reasons I start with Nietzsche is because Nietzsche is a very important thinker for both Strauss and Girard. They don't agree with Nietzsche on everything, but they think in many ways he got the diagnosis of the modern world just right. He understands our time, the times we're living in, better than almost any other philosopher or theologian who was his contemporary. So Nietzsche, in his book Beyond Good and Evil, he talks about these two values. We can call them values. He calls them something else, but the idea of equality of rights and sympathy for all who suffer. And he actually refers to them as the two songs of modernity, right? So this is, and I mean, we can think of every civilization as having like its own poetry, right? That people appeal to make sense of their lives, and for Nietzsche, our modern poetry, our modern understanding of ourselves and the world centers around these two values, these two songs: the song of equality and the song of sympathy for sufferers. And Nietzsche thinks that we're living in a time when a lot of the traditional values have died. Things like nobility of a certain kind, reverence for the past, loyalty to certain traditional ways of life, certain ideals of self-mastery, certain ideals having to do with manliness and womanliness, right? All of these values, which Nietzsche thinks have served human beings well at various points in our history, they're no longer valued in the way that they once were, right? So we're going through a period of the devaluation of all values. But the exception are these two values having to do with equality and sympathy. And I mean, Nietzsche knows that these are values we hold in high esteem, but he doesn't. He thinks that these are deeply problematic. And it has to do with his understanding of what was necessary in order for human beings to cultivate their highest potential. And so there are two things that are necessary. First of all, he thinks that human beings flourish best. That is, human beings achieve their highest degrees of excellence in a society where there is an order of rank. That is, in a society where high achievement is recognized and rewarded, and the high achievers even enjoy some kind of privileges, right? Second, he thinks that achieving the highest human potential requires what he calls the discipline of great suffering. Of course, we don't like suffering. We want to eliminate it, but Nietzsche thinks that if you do away with suffering, you do away with the possibility of excellence, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, he says, if we look at history, it's harsh circumstances that really force people to cultivate their strength, to discipline themselves and acquire those virtues that they need in order to face those challenges, right? So the suffering of certain kind helps us to foster certain forms of excellence. And also, as most people can attest from their own experience, whenever you undertake some effort at self-improvement, you want to make yourself better, right? You want to develop good habits, replace the bad habits. You always encounter resistance within yourself. And you can overcome that resistance only through painful effort. And so if we put a premium on comfort, eliminating suffering, making things as easy as possible for everybody, Nietzsche thinks that extinguishes the prospect of genuine human excellence, right? And so Nietzsche thinks that that's the problem with modernity, that we started dreaming of eliminating suffering altogether. But for Nietzsche, to eliminate suffering is tantamount to just eliminating our humanity. And I mean, if you want some confirmation for this, I mean, you can just look at some of the earliest modern philosophers. People like Francis Bacon and René Descartes in the 17th century. So these were a couple of the earliest modern philosophers of science, and they were very clear about what the purpose of science was. Science was to be put in the service of technology, and technology was to be put in the service of actually making people's material circumstances better. So Bacon writes that the new science, the goal of the new science, is relief of the human estate. He talks about it, how it should be perfected in charity, and that the goal should be to improve the material lot of the human race. Descartes is, if anything, even more explicit about that. He says that the aim of the new technological science, the science that would be based on Cartesian mathematics, right? That the goal of this science was to make human beings, this is his phrase, masters and owners of nature. Now, the idea is that we want to understand the forces of nature so well that we can manipulate them in the same way that a master craftsman, right, uses his tools, right? We want to put nature completely at our disposal, and in so doing, he mentions two aims in particular. One, prolonging human life, right? So he thinks that one of the most important applications of the new science will be in medicine, and also eliminating painful labor, right?
Okay, let me let me
Okay.
just interject here because
Cool.
I want to ask this question. Like everything that you're saying, like when it comes from like Francis Bacon, Rene Descartes,
Mm-hmm.
and the alleviation of suffering.
Right.
You know, I want to say something like, okay, those all sound like very Christian ideals.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And for some reason, um, does Nietzsche disdain that? Like, does he not care for that? Like, he's saying that's not like, is that why he doesn't like Christianity? Because it wants to.
That's part of it. Now, we need to be clear. Nietzsche is not anti-science.
Okay.
Right. So he's not. He's sometimes misunderstood in that way, but I mean, he's very pro-science, but he's very, very skeptical of this goal of using technology to eliminate suffering. And you're right that he believes that the roots of this goal ultimately lay in the Christian virtue of charity. Right? I mean, Francis Bacon even uses that word charity. So we need to perfect our science in charity, right? Now, charity was, I mean, charity comes from the Latin word caritas, right, which means love. Right? That's all it means, right? And so charity was originally a supernatural virtue, right? A supernatural virtue in the sense that you don't attain charity by your own efforts. It's a gift from God, and that it draws you closer to God. And so the idea here is that charity is this supernatural virtue having to do with the love of God and the love of your neighbor as someone who bears the image of them. But in the modern world, for various reasons that we can get into, these early modern philosophers, notably Bacon and Descartes, but there are others, they shift the meaning of the term charity. And so now it's understood in terms of I think of it as kind of ministering to the body, right? So the traditional idea of charity was ministering to the body as well as to the soul, right? But the soul drops out of the picture, right? God drops out of the picture, right? But we still have human beings who suffer, right? And so the aim of charity becomes ameliorating or even eliminating human suffering, and that's according to Nietzsche, and I think he's right about this. That's one of the fundamental premises, one of the fundamental aims of the modern project.
right. But now, okay. Now here's the thing. How do we do that in today's society? Because it seems like we actually maybe we think we're alleviating suffering, but
Mhm.
we're not actually doing that. So it's kind of like a, you know, okay, take for instance, we're talking about, Girard and Strauss here, right?
Mhm.
Like for Girard, he has this, idea of an internal mediation and external mediation,
Right.
right? And and let me see if I get this right now. The internal mediation, we've tried to solve certain problems that we have, like alleviating suffering
Mhm.
by creating, like, you know I want to say microtech, which is more like distractions, right? We've got the, now Apple has this thing where you can use, it's like a goggle thing, and
Yeah.
you can like do all this stuff, right? And then like you talked about the legal system, right? Like
Mhm.
it, what is it, the ind, is it the individual legal system, jurisprudence?
Well, the independent judiciary, right?
Yeah, the
So,
independent
so the
judiciary.
judiciary is like independent of the other branches of government. At least it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to be able to use the courts to go after your political enemies.
Right.
Not to say
So
this doesn't happen, but the ideal
yeah,
is that the judiciary is independent and that it's not supposed to be swayed by the political winds
right.
or by political power, but it renders its judgments on the basis of justice alone, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so in I guess where I'm trying to take this is we've tried to we've tried to alleviate our suffering by using, small, uh, little things that we think will get people to be a little bit happier,
Mhm.
but it hasn't actually worked. It hasn't been really effective, because, like, okay, you got the iPhone, but then you
Mhm.
want to upgrade, the
Right, of
next
course.
year,
Yep.
and then after that you want another upgrade,
Mhm.
and so it just keeps going. Like, man, I'm not satisfied with this, Uh,
Mhm.
so I guess uh, my question is, then what is the, maybe we haven't taken charity in the sense of the true word. We haven't been able to really figure that out in our modern age.
Mhm. Yeah, well, as I said, the traditional view of charity is that charity ministers to both the body and the soul, but the soul is more important, right? Because the soul was thought to be immortal. Um, but with modernity, and a lot of it has to do with the conflicts within Christendom in the late medieval period, early modern period. So a lot of these early philosophers, they were reacting against things like the Inquisition, right? Um, the kind of pious cruelty, right? Or religious zealotry, which was causing a lot of pain to people, right? But these religious zealots, the Inquisition, they thought they were doing something good because they thought they were ministering to people's souls, right? So you can kind of see why some of these early modern philosophers thought that something had gone wrong with this Christian notion of charity, that it was being used um, to justify, I mean, the most appalling cruelties, or the religious wars between the Protestants and the Catholics, right? So, and of course, there's been some recent scholarship that suggests that it was more complicated than just religious wars, but the religious wars, the religious conflict certainly was an element of this, and so you have people killing each other. And sometimes these are like internecine wars, right? Brother against brother. They're killing each other because they disagree as to the right way to get to heaven, right? Right. So again, what's the motivation behind this? A kind of charity. Charity understood as ministering to the soul. I mean, there's that famous saying, by the Pope. I don't know if you know about the Cathars, the Albigensian heresy, where the Pope sent in the armies to just wipe them out because he believed that their teachings were heretical. And quite famously, he said, and scandalously, he said, kill them all. God will know his own. Right? In other words, if you kill them, well, that's okay, because the righteous ones are going to make their way to him. And that's what matters, right? It's the soul that matters, not the body. Right? And so you can see why these modern philosophers, and I've mentioned a couple of them, Bacon and Descartes. There are others who are very important, like Machiavelli and Hobbes. And I talk a little bit about Locke in my essay. But you can see why they thought, well, we need something different. We need to understand. We need to abandon this old idea of charity, which has become just the justification for so much more than cruelty, right? And we need to, all of that energy that people were spending killing each other, right, and torturing each other and tormenting each other over religion, well, maybe we can put that energy to work actually making this world better, right? Better in the sense of creating more creaturely comforts for people rather than trying to, set everybody's soul straight.
Right. Okay.
But, part of the problem of that, and I talk about this in my paper, is that, there are these traditional ways of dealing with the problem of mimetic desire. We can talk more about that if you want, go into more detail. But briefly, the idea is that desire is very problematic, because desire is the source of conflicts, particularly when people come to desire the same things, which we naturally do, right? Because we tend to imitate each other's desires, right? And that can lead to violence. It can even lead to a total social mess. Right? And so we need strategies to deal with that. And of course, this is one of the big themes of Girard's writings. And he points out that in the pre-modern world prior to, 16th, 17th century, when modernity begins to emerge, the primary way in which societies dealt with the problem of desire was through what he calls external mediation. Right? And you mentioned that before. And so basically, as I said before, Girard thinks that human beings naturally tend to imitate the desires of others. Right? We're born full of desire, but we don't know what to desire. Right? We're born with this kind of inchoate dissatisfaction. I want something. I don't know what it is, but I feel like something's missing. Right? I think a lot of us have had, that experience. And there's, I think Girard is very influenced here by Augustine, who thinks that sense of lack, or Augustine calls it kind of a restless heart, That's just concomitant with being a creature, right? That's our creatureliness. We're finite, we're temporal, we're contingent, we're not our own creator, we're not the masters of our existence. And so because of our creatureliness, we are dependent, right? We're dependent creatures. And the way that we experience that is through desire. And Augustine says ultimately what we desire, or what would ultimately satisfy our desire, is God, right? Because God is everything that we're not and everything we want, right? We're finite, God's infinite. We're temporal, God's eternal, right? Right. And so as long as we cling to other beings that are finite and temporal, we're not going to be able to satisfy the kind of infinite hunger that we have for true being. We can only get that from God. And I think that's Girard's view as well. But what Girard adds to that, and there are hints of this in Augustine and hints of it in a lot of other philosophers, but Girard, I think, is the first one to spell it out fully. Is that because we don't know what we really want, we look around for people who seem to have it together, right? Which would normally be people with high prestige, people who we highly esteem or who are highly esteemed by others, and we figure, well, that person has this fullness of being that I lack, right? And so what I want is that person's being, right? I want to be like him, right? I think of that song from the Jungle Book, right? Right, where King Louis the orangutan sings the song, I want to be just like you. He sings the Mowgli, right? Because he's so envious of human beings. Human beings seem they got it going on. They seem to have it figured out, right? And human beings also have this thing called fire. And so King Louis wants to learn the secret of fire because he figures out if he can have what the human beings have, right, then he can be like them, right? That he can overcome his own sense of insufficiency. I assume you've seen Jungle Book.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because for me, that's just such a lovely illustration of the point that Girard is making, right? And so we imitate others, we desire the things that they desire, or even sometimes just the things we think they desire, right? And that leads us into conflict when these are things that can't be shared, or either can't be shared, or the model or mediator doesn't want to share them because he or she doesn't want to give up the prestige of being the sole owner of these things, right? And so that's for Girard, that's the principal source of human conflict. Now, in traditional societies, pre-modern societies, the way they deal with that is through what Girard calls external mediation. And so we have to digress a little bit, if that's okay. Okay, so we model our desires on others. Those others, we can call them models, or we can call them mediators, right? Because they mediate desire for us. And
they help us figure out what we want, right?
Right. They tell us what we should desire because we don't know, right? So we look to people who we imagine, rightly or wrongly, know what's good, right? And so there are two kinds of mediators. There's internal and external mediators. And Girard talks about these a lot in his very first book, which is called Deceit, Desire, and the Novel. And it turns out that the distinction between the two is really the key to understanding social history and to understanding the rise of modernity. And the difference between these two kind of mediators has to do with how close to us or how distant they are from us. So, for example, say I'm an aspiring entrepreneur. I want to build a business, right? My mediator, my model, might be Peter Thiel, right? But Peter Thiel lives in a completely different world than I do, right? So I'm not going to get into a conflict with him unless I become, obscenely rich like him, and then maybe we can. But as long as I'm down here and he's up there, he can be my model without any danger of conflict. Or the model might be an historical figure, right? So based on some things I've read, Joseph Stalin looked to Ivan the Great as a model, right? And there's considerable evidence that he was pretty serious about that. Or in Girard's first book, Deceit, Desire, the novel, he talks about Miguel Cervantes' book Don Quixote, and he talks about how Don Quixote modeled himself after Amadis of Gaul, who's a fictional character, but for Quixote, Amadis was the exemplary knight, right? And so if Quixote was going to be a good knight, he needed to be like Amadis in every way, right? You can give lots of examples of this, of external mediation. So it's still something that's very present in our world. But Girard says that traditional societies are structured around this relationship of external mediation. So there's usually some set of culturally sanctioned saints and heroes, right, who are the models of excellence, who we hold in esteem, right? And if you want to be a good person, right, you have to model yourself after them. So in ancient Greece, for example, if you want to be a manly man, you had to try to be like Achilles, right? In medieval Christendom, if you wanted to be a good Christian, then you wanted to be like Christ, right? Or the imitatio Christi, right? You want to be like Christ, or about the saints. Those are the people that you measure yourself against. Right? In classical China, the members of the educated elite, they look to Confucius as a model, right? And so one of the things that this illustrates is that all of these traditional societies, they have external mediators. They have people who in the minds of the society kind of exemplify what it is to be a real man or a real human being, right? But they look very different from each other, right? Because they have different kinds of social ideals. Now, another facet of traditional societies is that, and Girard doesn't emphasize this quite as much, but it's something that Strauss emphasizes, is that the elites generally believe that, or at least they say they believe, that it's their responsibility to uphold these models of excellence, to kind of set the tone for the society as a whole, right? And so, in the upper ranks of society, we'll have competition, for status and all kinds of things, but ideally, this competition for status will be about who can best embody these high and noble ideals of society, right? That are represented by Achilles or Christ or Confucius or Muhammad or whoever, right? And also in these traditional societies, there there tends to be lots of what Leo Strauss calls sacred restraints. And these sacred restraints, their main function is to limit people's desires. So they set limits on what you can do, but also they set limits on what you can desire, right? So, I mean, a good example of this is the 10th commandment, right? So the 10 commandments, we have all these commandments that say, don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery. And then the final commandment is not about an action, but it's about a desire. It says, do not covet what belongs to your neighbor. And covet is just a fancy word for desire. Right? So you have these rules governing desire, and then they'll differ from society to society. Societies have different customs, right? But they're all in some way about preventing or mitigating conflict, right? By structuring people's relationships with each other and their desires in such a way that conflict is minimized. Also, in traditional societies, there are always lots of rules governing sexuality, right? Because, as we all know, that's an especially treacherous field of desire, and there's lots of potential for rivalry and all kinds of harm that can be done if we don't govern our sexual desires in a responsible way, right? But we've arrived at a point in our history where that all is just so distant from us that we don't understand the point of a lot of these prohibitions, right? And as Girard points out, we just experience them as they're just oppressive, right? They're limitations on our freedom. There's these, the bad people, these prudish people, these religious fanatics, right? Who just hate to see anybody have any fun, right? And that's why they impose all of these prohibitions on us. So we've lost an awareness of what their point is. So in the modern world, the system of, Girard calls it a system of degree, right? Where you have to have people at the top who are ideally serious about virtue, set the tone for society, because they are the ones who are in their own lives trying to exemplify the high ideals of society, right? And then you have the lower orders of society, people who don't worry about that so much because they have to spend most of their time just trying to get by, tilling the soil and, looking after their kids, that sort of thing, right? But essentially, this is a class stratified society that is set up in such a way as to inculcate certain kinds of virtues, shape the desires of the leaders, and place limits on what people can desire in people's behavior in order to maintain peace and order, right? And what happens in the modern world, and this is what I described in my paper, is that this ladder of degree collapses, right? And so you have the emergence of this idea of equality, right? And Strauss points out, and Strauss is very good on this, because it's not just about social equality. It's also about the fact that these what we nowadays call values, but what Strauss calls just the ends that we pursue, or the things that we regard as good, the projects that we organize our lives in, right? We now think that they're all equal, right? So maybe you like to go to mass, that's fine for you. I like to hang out in my basement, watch porn. That's fine for me. It's all the same as long as everybody is, as long as everybody is consenting. We don't have to worry about what people desire. And if we do, then, we're being judgmental and intolerant. We're being busybodies. And,
trying to control.
exactly. We don't like that in modern age, right? So we have this. So along with this collapse of degree, we also have this emancipation of desire, right? And
Now, when
go
you
ahead.
say when you say emancipation of desire, that means sort of like we've let go of the prohibitions and the taboos, and we just
Right.
can, whatever we can do whatever
Yeah. So emancipation of desire from all of these traditional sacred restraints, right? So there was a time when philosophers taught if you want to be happy, the way to do that is by limiting your desires, right? Um, because the more you desire, the more unhappy you're going to be, right? Because your desires are always going to outrun whatever you have. Right? So you made the example, and so now I own the latest doodad from Apple, these goggles. I don't even understand exactly how they work, but I still need to have them because some influencer on YouTube was telling me that they're great. My friends have them, and I don't want to be left behind, right? And so I got to go out and work hard and earn the money so I can get these ridiculous things, and that's really cool for a while. But then that gets old, right? And now some new thing is being dangled in front of me, and I forget about my Apple goggles or whatever they're called, and I got to go for this new thing, right? And so we live in a world, and this is basically what keeps the capitalist economy going, is keeping people perpetually dissatisfied with what they have, always wanting more. And so that's part of what's meant by emancipation of desire, because once you emancipate desire, there's no natural limit to it, right? Now our physical needs, there's a limit to them, right? So I ate lunch a little while ago. Before I sat down to lunch, I was hungry. I ate lunch. No, I'm not hungry anymore, right? I'm not going to keep eating because I don't want to. It's going to make me sick, right? So our needs have a kind of natural limit to them, but desire is a very different beast. And I mentioned before I was talking about Augustine. Right? Augustine thinks that our desire is ultimately a desire for God. That's why our desire is infinite, can only be satisfied. He says our hearts are restless and they can only rest in thee, in God. All right. So we can spend our whole life, chasing after the latest consumer good, and we're never going to be satisfied. But, it is going to, we're going to make a lot of people rich, and we're going to, one of the points that Girard makes is that, when degree collapses, we go from external mediation to internal mediation, which means instead of looking up for our model, right? I want to be like this great hero who is above me, who's greater than me. Instead, we look sideways. Right? We look at our neighbor, and we want what our neighbor has. We enter into competition and rivalry with those people who are on the same level as ourselves, right? And Girard thinks that, in order to deal with this, we've developed a number of institutions, and one of which is the capitalist market, which allows us to channel this mimetic desire into the desire for consumer goods, right? So rather than having to go out and fight duels with my neighbor because I get into a mimetic rivalry with him, right? We could just, we'll just compete over who has the newest, shiniest, biggest vehicle.
Right.
Right.
But now, what about the and we can move on, but I just want to know about how does that work with the judiciary system, because this is something that I think
Okay.
has really been maybe talked about in different ways, how, like in our day and age, like
Yeah.
people will say the judiciary system is not fair. The legal system that we have there's a lot of problems with it, and then some people will say, no, we need more constraints. We need more. There are things about it that well, I'll put it this way. If you want to put it like in a conservative versus progressive lens, conservatives will say, we need more restrictions. We need to go back to the way things were. And then the progressives will say, well, no, we need to have other ways to deal with this. The judiciary system is too caught up in trying to hold on to a hierarchy, or something like that. So how does it work with the judges? Because okay, a person like me, being a millennial, right? I guess I would want to say I agree with them sometimes, and then at the same time I want to say, okay, but there are restrictions, there are prohibitions and taboos that we have in order to not let things get out of control. So
yeah. Well, the thing is that before, in the pre-modern world, you didn't have as many laws because you didn't need them, and it's not because people were necessarily better or naturally more well behaved, but it's because you had all of these informal norms that people themselves would enforce, right? So
it was almost like natural to them to follow that.
Say it again.
I said, so it kind of came natural to them to follow that order or follow that.
Yeah, well, it didn't. I mean, of course, people experience temptations, that they wanted to kind of deviate from the norms, but everybody in the community was enforcing the norms, right? And they would enforce it in lots of ways, but often just through social ostracism, right? So if this is how we ought to act. You don't act that way, and so therefore we're going to sneer at you and hold you in contempt. And you don't like that. Well, then you better straighten up, right? And that was, fairly effective, right? So you had this whole range of social norms. People understood themselves not just as kind of isolated individuals, one billiard ball rolling around the table, bumping into other billiard balls, but understood themselves as organically related to others, right? So to be in a community is to be in relationship to other people, and what defined those relationships were specific sorts of obligations, right? And so a lot of the norms have to do with those obligations and expectations of behavior based on who you were, where you stood in relationship to other people, and what your station in life was, right? And these norms were deeply internalized, right? In the modern world, we've come to think of ourselves more and more just as individuals, right? And as I said before, a lot of these norms, we just think of them as oppressive. Right? So we're just getting in the way of my freedom. And of course, freedom is our primary, one incontestable value, right? Nobody can be against freedom, because freedom is just freedom is the whole premise of our society. The only reason that we would restrict anybody else's freedom is because they're doing something to to impair somebody else's exercise of freedom, right? And so all of these norms of social control, at least a lot of them, we've just abandoned them. And so what happens? Well, we need the state to step in, right? We need the state, and of course the court. The courts are part of the state apparatus. We need that to take up the slack, right? And to use coercion, whereas before, at least direct coercion wasn't necessary because of the ubiquity of these norms and how internalized they were, right? So, is that answering some of your question?
Yes, no, it definitely. Yes, it does. That's because that's one I've always been hung up on. It's just that. But now, let's maybe we can turn to your essay more in terms of where Girard and Strauss differ, right? Because
yeah,
I guess and I'm going to try and interpret this. Strauss believes in keeping, I guess, certain levels of knowledge, and I guess we call it esoteric knowledge, right?
Right.
In a closed off group, and that would be with the philosophers,
right?
People who are able to rise or transcend their I guess base passions or something like that. The vulgar people, right? And then the gentlemen, right, who are sort of a class of people who who have money, they have wealth, they have power, but that the philosopher is above all these, and we need to restore that type of man in society in order to stop having this, in order to stop having this chaos, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think basically that's right. I mean, the most important thing to understand here, though, is that when Strauss talks about philosophers, he's not talking about people who teach in philosophy departments. He's not talking about me, for instance. He's talking about a very, very rare kind of human being whose overriding desire is simply to know or to understand the whole of things, or we could even say a kind of openness to the whole, right? So when Strauss talks about sort of classical society, he's an important scholar of Plato, and so he derives a lot of this from the study of Plato, but also from other classical writers like Thucydides, Herodotus, the tragedians. What emerges is kind of this kind of system of degree, right? Strauss doesn't use that language. That's Girard's language, which he gets from Shakespeare, but it is a kind of hierarchical social order. And you have the gentlemen, and as you said, I mean the gentlemen are the landed gentry. They're people who own land, and other people work that land for them, right? And so they have an income from their land, but they don't have to work very much, right? And so they have leisure, and they can devote this leisure time to education, to the arts, right? To these various, edifying activities, to poetry and music, all of which are designed to kind of get them enamored of a certain ideal of virtue, right? So the kind of the ideal of manliness that is found in Homer's Iliad, for instance, right? But Strauss says that there's another class in society, and it's just exceedingly rare, who are not the vulgar, not the ordinary people, the people who are out there, plowing the fields, and it's not the gentlemen, it's the philosophers. Now the ordinary folks, what they desire, I don't know if you've ever been a member of the working class or worked in a factory or something like that. You know what you desire at the end of the day? You want to go someplace and have a beer and throw darts and that sort of thing. You don't want to sit around and have someone read poetry to you, for goodness sake. Yeah. So your desires are not particularly elevated, right?
Right.
Then you have the gentry, right? Ideally, if they've received the right kind of education, what they desire is to be a certain kind of person, a certain kind of virtuous person, or to instantiate a certain kind of ideal of excellence. And then you have the philosophers. And their desire is not for pleasure, and it's not even for moral virtue, right? Which isn't to say that they're not virtuous people. It's not to say they're bad people, but that's not the principle that they organize their lives around. What their desire is for understanding of the whole of things. Now you said that you talked about a kind of knowledge that is exclusive to the philosophers, right? What Strauss refers to as kind of esoteric knowledge. And what this idea comes out of, let's just make it really concrete. Think about the death of Socrates, right? Socrates is put to death by the Athenians because they think he's dangerous. And Strauss says they're not wrong. I mean, there is something about philosophy which is dangerous to the social order, because every society rests upon some fundamental opinion, right? We talked before differences between like Confucian society and classical Greek society, right? They have different ideals of excellence, right? So Strauss would say what that means is that they have different fundamental opinions about what is good, right? What is a good life for a human being? What it means to live well. The philosopher, on the other hand, questions everything, including those fundamental opinions about what is good and what is just and what is noble, those fundamental opinions upon which the social order rests. And so philosophers are potentially very, very dangerous characters. And so because of that, and because of the risk that's illustrated by the death of Socrates, philosophers in the classical tradition practiced a kind of esotericism, where outwardly they would seem to be endorsing the social order, right? Endorsing the conventional virtues. Socrates is often depicted, delivering all of his homilies about how you should be just and all of that. But that's just exoteric, right? That's for public consumption. If you read like Plato's dialogues carefully, if you read between the lines, and if you follow the various clues that he has left there, and if you alert to the various trap doors that allow you to kind of get beneath the text and find out what's really going on, what you discover is that the philosopher really isn't a good citizen in that way, that the philosopher, is someone who isn't committed to the same moral ideals of his society. He's committed to something very different, his pursuit of truth at all costs. So that's Strauss's idea, the classical idea of philosophy, but he thinks that there's a shift in the understanding of philosophy with beginning with Machiavelli and then with other modern moral philosophers.
Right. And so I guess just to close out here, then they have different solutions to our modern problems, right? I mean, Strauss has a different solution than Girard, and I think he wrote in the essay something about charity versus philanthropy. Right?
Yeah, well, that's not something that Strauss talks about a lot. I mean, he has some things to say about charity, but not a lot. Lampert says some things about philanthropy. So Lampert makes the argument that the philosophers, the genuine philosophers, right? Not philosophy professors, right? But genuine philosophers are philanthropic in that they're concerned for human beings. And in particular, they're concerned with fostering what is best in human beings. And to begin with, that means helping to create a kind of social environment in which philosophy can flourish, right? So protecting the very possibility of there being philosophy, that's part of philanthropic philanthropy. But also helping to create an environment in which these other kinds of virtues, the virtues that aren't particularly important to the philosopher, but the virtues that society needs to survive. So fostering an environment that is conducive to the virtuous life for human beings, because that is what enables the human race as a whole to flourish, right? And that's kind of what Nietzsche was on, right? So this is why Nietzsche is so critical of these modern doctrines of equality and sympathy for sufferers, because he thinks that it gets in the way of cultivating human excellence, right, for the reasons that I explained earlier. Right? And so it seems to me, and this is actually part of my project, it's kind of teasing out the difference between philanthropy and charity. And I should mention, I'm very influenced here by my friend Marty Sulik, who has written quite insightfully about the history of the idea of philanthropy. He's at one of the earliest places where we find this word, philanthropy or philanthropos. It's a Greek word, by the way, because it comes from philos, which means love, and anthropos, which means human beings, right? So philanthropy literally means just loving human beings, right? So it's similar in meaning in that way, at least on its surface, similar in meaning to charity, which comes from the Latin caritas, which also means love. But Marty finds one of the earliest occurrences of this word philanthropos in the play by Aeschylus about Prometheus. So Prometheus is described as a philanthropist. And also the term comes up in a couple very, very significant places within the Platonic corpus, right? So now this is a controversial view, and I don't know to what extent Strauss would agree, but certainly it's Lampert's view that philosophy is not only this love of wisdom, but it's also a kind of love of human beings. That is, the philosopher, as Nietzsche says in Beyond Good and Evil, the philosopher is someone who understands himself as having responsibility for the whole development of the human race. right? And so the philosopher puts forward his teachings, whatever they may be, with an eye to that, with an eye to what their impact will be on humanity. Whereas charity in the modern world has come to mean just refer to just the body, right? And so charity is wanting to eliminate suffering, right? Charity is wanting to make things as easy as possible on everybody. The contemporary concerns about recognition, right? Everybody needs to have their identity recognized, because if other people don't recognize my identity, that wounds me in some really, really fundamental way, right? And that's painful, and that's not good. So out of charity, we need to defer to the desire of people to have their identities affirmed in a certain way, right? So all of that, I mean, we can see that this concern with alleviating suffering, with making life easier for people, with protecting people from being harmed in any way, right? With protecting people from becoming victims, right? All of this grows out of this modern understanding of charity. But again, it's not the traditional understanding, because the traditional understanding is not just ministering to the body, but ministering to the soul, right? And so, yeah. Go ahead, please.
And this is not to, not trying to scandalize Girard, right here. Girard, I said I'm not trying to scandalize Girard here, so I don't want anyone to think that. So Girard would have, when he prescribes the word charity, or says that we need more charity, he's speaking of it in the pre-modern sense, right? Ministering to the body and the soul, or
well, and I don't know. That's not always clear, because, well, first of all, Girard doesn't use the word charity a lot. I mean, it comes up. I mean, I was just the other day, I was looking at a passage where Girard talks about the emergence of the hospital in medieval Europe, and he associates this with charity, right? And he's absolutely right. That's precisely where it comes from. But the term that he favors is concern for victims, and for Girard, concern for victims is both a positive and a negative phenomenon, right? So we can list the positives, and I mean, and the positives are certainly nothing to sneer at, right? So you mentioned the judiciary, right? So we have courts now where we presume the innocence of the accused, right? You go into court, the burden is on the prosecutor to prove your guilt. You don't have to prove your innocence. This is one way of protecting innocent people, protecting people from being victimized or becoming victims of a vindictive mob, right? That's a really, really good thing, right? Or probably one of the most significant accomplishments, one of the most significant achievements of the modern world has been the abolition of slavery. Every pre-modern society has been built on slavery of some form or another. It's only in the modern world that slavery was abolished. And of course, the people leading the campaign to abolish slavery were in many instances, maybe most instances, Christians, right? Who became convinced that to enslave another human being was just contrary to the fundamental dignity of all human beings, which they found affirmed in the Christian scriptures, right? or the emancipation of women, right? The elevation of the status of women, right? That has been another important achievement of the modern world that reflects this concern for victims, right? So I mean, we could go on and on and on and on. So in many ways, this is a tremendously positive phenomenon. Girard says that the modern world has done more to rescue victims or potential victims than any previous society, right? But this concern for victims can also be a negative phenomenon, right? And it becomes a negative phenomenon when it gets hijacked by a certain kind of ideology, right? And so Girard sometimes refers to, political correctness, victimism, a situation where in order to gain status, in order to get a respectful hearing from other people, you have to claim that you're a victim in some way, right? And once you've made that,
yeah.
And once you've
everybody
made
wants to be one.
Pardon me?
Everybody wants to be one.
Yes, exactly. And it is a totally novel thing,
Right.
because you can't imagine someone like Achilles saying, "I'm a victim." I'm a victim. Then everybody, you got to stop what you're doing and listen to my complaints, right? And expect to get a sympathetic hearing. It just no. But in the modern world, that works because we're so acutely sensitive to the plight of victims that these claims of victimization can be weaponized, right? And also, as I said before, we have these traditional moral prohibitions that once and maybe even today serve a good purpose, right? In restraining people's desires in order to avoid conflict and there's other forms of unhappiness and misery. They're now regarded as oppressive, right? And so we're victimized by these oppressive moral and religious strictures, right? So whenever we talk about this concern for victims, we cannot forget the fact of the abolition of slavery, right? Or the protection of the rights of innocent people, or the protections of the rights of religious minorities, right? Or the protection of the rights of women, the elevation of the status of women, protection of the rights of children, right? Who used to be that, children, would work 10, 12 hours a day in a factory. Horrifying to us. At the time, it was just, that's their misfortune of, being the children of poor factory workers. What are you going to do? But now we're horrified of that. We will not tolerate that sort of thing. And it reflects, this concern for victims, which Girard argues comes out of Christianity.
Right. But see, now that's, and I'm gonna stop talking because I know I might be asking too many questions, but this last one here, it seems to me that yes, so Christianity has brought about our concern for the victim,
mm-hmm.
and at the same time, it's also allowed for everybody to want to be the victim, right? So we recognize that Christianity has sort of opened up things to us, as far as our need to be, have more love and concern and want to do, the best for our fellow men. But then it seems like, especially here in the West, like we turn against Christianity. Like we are really we like, okay, I'll put it like this. It's like you can say whatever negative thing you want about Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't say that about any other religion. You know, like it's okay to, like we need to respect Islam. We need to respect Buddhism, Hinduism, but Christianity can just take all the blows. Like, you're the one, that's the worst religion that ever existed on this planet. So it's kind of, that's always been weird to me. Like, why is that Christianity has sort of been, and I'm not saying, I'm not trying to, get you to like say, yeah, Christianity is the best religion, but it just seems to me like, okay, if Christianity's done so much good, then why is it so demonized in the places where it took up root and flourished so much?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, in the first place, it's not widely recognized that this good has come out of Christianity, right? So I mentioned slavery. I think this is probably the most important example that we can give of the way Christianity has transformed the world, because it's made it possible. It's encouraged people to campaign to abolish slavery, and yet, the people who had slaves, at least in the antebellum South, were all Christians, right? And they all had their collection of Bible passages that they could point to, to justify it, right? And so, or I talked about the emancipation of women, right? Which has really been the work of Christianity. Women do not have as many rights in any other civilization prior to modern civilization, which was created in part by Christianity. But if you look at some of the letters of Paul, you read things like women must remain silent in church, right? Or the man is to his wife as Christ is to the church. Sounds like women are being accorded a subordinate status, right? And so we don't like that. So people can still find lots of things to dislike in Christianity, and can find reasons not to give Christianity credit for some of these good things that have been brought about by the concern for victims. And also, I mentioned a while ago about what was going on right on the cusp of the modern world with the Inquisition, right, and the religious wars, right? And so you have the modern philosophers, who are saying, we need to get our mind off of heaven, because that's the cause of all these problems that we're experiencing, right? And so to this day, it's a widely held view that religion is itself a cause of violence and conflict. Now, Girard argues something just the opposite. Girard argues that actually, religion is a way of coping with them.
Yeah,
violence and conflict. Yeah, but that's certainly not self-evident. So anyway, maybe that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's been really cool to explore these questions with you. I have all that running through my mind all the time, and I'm like, I wish somebody could explain that to me, or why is something like that, But I really appreciated, you sitting down and having this conversation with me. I know I've gone over our time, the time lot that we were supposed to, but
well, that's right. I've enjoyed it. Okay. I have really.
Great, thank you. Well, Dr. Dunn, maybe I can get you on again for another
Yeah.
conversation. We can, you know, talk some more Girard, and maybe we could next week talk. I don't know if you've ever read Violence in the Sacred.
Yes, I have. Yes, of course.
Okay, yeah, maybe we could talk about that next, because that's my favorite book. You know,
Oh, okay.
it's anthropology, so I
Hmm.
enjoy it. So,
Is that your background in anthropology?
No, I actually majored in history, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, but anthropology is sort of like my what do you call it? Like, they say the thing you're most passionate about, you don't major in. You know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we didn't really talk about, the scapegoat mechanism,
Yes. Right.
which of
Right.
course is a crucial component of Girard's whole system. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll talk about that at some later date.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm down with that. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I hope everything clears up over there with the ash and all that. Starts to sort of do
I
some
do too.
rain. Get some rain like we do. Yeah. So okay. Well, I'll let you have a good Friday, and I hope you enjoy your weekend. Everything.
Okay, and same to you. Same to you. I've enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you so much.